This experience has a somewhat exalted reputation within the psychonaut community, and to a lesser extent mainstream culture in general. It is often surrounded by notions of esoteric mysticism, or anecdotal assertions which clearly fall outside of standard scientific materialism. And while most famously associated with dimethyltryptamine, it is a relatively common experience at heavy dosages of a wide variety of psychedelic compounds, particularly those which are more prone to inducing hallucinatory states, such as ayahuasca, psilocybin, and mescaline. Now, in terms of their appearance and general presentation, autonomous entities and internal hallucinations in general are usually comprised from condensed psychedelic geometry. This is in a manner which can give them an incredibly complex, incomprehensible, and otherworldly aesthetic that is clearly demonstrated within the countless examples of visionary artwork shown here within this video. But as for the specific forms in which they present themselves, while they can include literally anything, certain archetypes are definitely present and commonly include humans, aliens, elves, animals, giant spheres, insectoids, beings of light, plants, cartoons, robotic machines, gods and demigods, biomechanical intelligences, anthropomorphic beings, jesters, demons, indescribable monstrosities, spirits, angels, shamans, fantastical or mythological beasts, abstract geometric forms, and many, many more. During their apparition, autonomous entities will frequently be presented as the inhabitants of a perceived independent reality, which is often subjectively interpreted as a different dimension or plane of existence. These inhabited hallucinatory realms can include anything, but common archetypes often include cities, temples, rooms, circuses, caverns, natural landscapes, and abstract geometric structures. And while they most commonly appear alone within these spaces, they can also often be within small or large groups alongside of other entities, which may take similar or completely different physical forms of their own. Now, as for their response to the tripper, some entities do not seem to be aware of a person's presence, but many others are often precognizant of a person's appearance into their supposed realm, and usually choose to interact with them in various ways. For example, they will often display behaviors such as showing a person around the realm that they inhabit, presenting them with objects, holding spontaneous celebrations of their arrival, merging into and out of the person's body or consciousness, engaging them in conversation, and attempting to impart knowledge of various kinds. Overall, the general appearance, personality, and behavior of an autonomous entity often correlates with the psychological state of the person experiencing it. For example, a person with a positive mindset will more commonly experience loving, kind, and healing entities, but in contrast, a person with a negative mindset may be more likely to experience hateful, sinister, and mocking entities. It's also worth noting that when experienced within the specific context of psychedelic compounds, autonomous entities are much more likely to manifest within internal hallucinations during high-level states, rather than within external hallucinations. This means that entity encounters primarily occur within an imagined environment that can typically only be viewed with closed eyes, similar to those found within dreams. So although psychedelic entities can sometimes still present themselves as seamlessly appearing within one's external environment as if they were physically present, for the majority of people it is generally a much rarer occurrence. Now, in terms of their overall visibility, presence, and clarity, entities can manifest themselves across 3 approximate levels of increasing intensity. Level 1. Vaguely defined presence. At the lowest level, autonomous entities generally consist of poorly defined outlines and abstract shapes that are barely distinguishable from the background behind them and the geometry which they are comprised of. However, These encounters are still often accompanied by a distinct feeling of a sensed presence of another conscious being. Level 2. Partially defined presence. At this level, autonomous entities become distinctly visible within one's visual field, but are not fully defined in their appearance or entirely separated from their background. At this point, it also becomes more common to feel a sense of general intent and personality attributed to the entity. Level 3. Fully defined presence. At this level, the autonomous entities become distinct enough in their detail and vividness to extend beyond transparent or poorly defined manifestations. They are now capable of a completely convincing and photorealistic appearance, and their general behavior also becomes far more detailed and lifelike. Communication styles. Autonomous entities can communicate with a person through a wide range of different methods and styles. These styles can include any combination of standard spoken word, telepathy, conceptual thoughts, choreographed movements, mathematics, and even geometry-based visual linguistics that generally consist of complex morphing structures that are immediately interpreted as innately understandable representations of specific concepts. As for the content of their messages, entities will commonly provide insights regarding overcoming personal issues within a person's life, and will occasionally help clarify philosophical or spiritual ideas. In contrast, however, they are equally likely to speak in a cryptic or nonsensical manner that seems to have no clear meaning behind it. It's also important to note that autonomous entities can seemingly never convey truly novel information to the person experiencing them. For example, they cannot provide insights about the external world that a person did not already know on some level. Instead, they can only provide alternative perspectives and help build upon pre-existing ideas. This is presumably because autonomous entities do not have access to any knowledge not already contained within the tripper's conscious or subconscious memories. Personality types. As far as I can tell at least, autonomous entities will often embody at least one of a few approximate personality types that I have done my best at attempting to categorize. Although there is admittedly considerable overlap between them, these personality types can sometimes be identified primarily through a combination of their behavior, their appearance, and an innate sense of their character that is often felt during the interaction. These individual types are broken down and described within the following 4 approximate categories. Representations of characters. This personality type can be described as a seemingly sentient representation of any hallucinatory character that the brain has either spontaneously generated during the trip or was already aware of at a prior time. These entities can include newly hallucinated characters of any sort, people that the person has met in real life, people that the person is aware of as existing in the real world, or characters from fictional media. These entities will usually adopt an appropriate personality and set of mannerisms to fit the chosen character concept with an impressive degree of detail. An example of this might be meeting an insectoid mantis-like creature that is playing the role of a shamanic teacher and acting accordingly. Another might include meeting the hallucination of a deceased loved one or a currently living family friend. Representations of ideas and concepts. This personality type can be described as a seemingly sentient representation of any known concept or idea. These specific concepts could include personified representations of abstract ideas, events, and emotions. An example of this might be meeting a mocking jester that feels and acts as if it represents one's own insecurities. Another might include meeting a clockwork being that feels as if it represents entropy and the inevitable passing of time. Representations of the subconscious. This personality type can take any visible form, but is subjectively interpreted as the autonomous controller behind the continuous generation of the details of the person's current experience. This entity is also often felt to simultaneously control one's current perspective, personality, and internally stored model of reality. When interacted with, this category of entity can often possess abilities that allow them to directly alter and manipulate one's current experiences. In terms of their motives, they commonly want to teach or guide the person and will seemingly operate under the assumption that they know what is best for them. However, although a relatively common experience, it still cannot be known whether this type of autonomous entity is genuinely an experience of directly communicating with the so-called subconscious mind, and what that would even mean if it were the case, or if it is perhaps merely a hallucinatory approximation that simply behaves in a convincing manner. Representations of the self. This personality type can be described as a direct copy of one's own personality. It can take any visible form, but when conversed with, it clearly adopts an identical vocabulary and set of mannerisms to one's own consciousness. This entity will often take on a similar appearance to oneself, but could theoretically take on any other appearance too. During this experience, there is also a distinct feeling that one's own consciousness is somehow being mirrored and duplicated into the hallucinated autonomous entity that is being interacted with. Okay, so to wrap this video up, and at risk of alienating a certain subsection of my audience, I would just like to make a few points regarding the beliefs which commonly surround psychedelic entities, and my personal opinion on those viewpoints. So within the Psychonaut community, and DMT users in particular, autonomous entities are commonly viewed as one of the most captivating aspects of the psychedelic experience. They are often shrouded in esoteric mystery, to the point that a significant portion of the people who encounter them will go as far as asserting that these experiences are not simply fabrications of the mind, but rather beings from another world that exists independently of the human brain. This is a viewpoint that was originally popularized in mainstream culture by the likes of Terence McKenna, who famously theorized that the machine elves he encountered under the influence of DMT were either extraterrestrial in nature, interdimensional beings from a higher plane of existence, time-traveling humans from the future, or an arcology of souls that apparently includes both our ancestors and those who have yet to be born. As far as I can tell, the most common reasonings behind this viewpoint are that the experience of encountering these entities is often interpreted as feeling more realistic and well-defined than that of any sober experience the person has ever had. Alongside this, there is often a sense that the encounter itself is so incomprehensibly complex and otherworldly that there is simply no possible way that the human brain could generate such an experience on its own. In regards to this particular notion, it is then sometimes asserted that consciousness must be an antenna of sorts that receives either all or some of its subjective experiences from that of an unknown interdimensional source. Furthermore, the source of this received input is sometimes said to be adjustable depending on the person's brain state, with substances such as psychedelics simply tuning our consciousness into the analogous equivalent of a different radio station or TV channel. This is an idea that was once again further popularized by Terence McKenna, who was famously quoted as saying, "I don't believe consciousness is generated in the brain any more than television programs are made inside my TV. The box is too small." Now, while I can personally empathize with the reasons that some people may be drawn into these conclusions after the often earth-shattering experience of a DMT trip or other high-level psychedelic experience, I do not personally believe that autonomous entities are anything more than the profound but ultimately hallucinated products of the subconscious mind. Instead, I am quite sure that they are simply the psychedelic equivalent of the various characters and beings that most people commonly encounter within their dreams. Although it could be argued that autonomous entities are too characteristically different from that of dream characters to possibly be a result of the same neurological processes, I think that these differences in their appearance and behavior are largely the result of the many other psychedelic effects that are simultaneously occurring during these encounters. The most notable of which is geometry, which causes the hallucination to be comprised of the otherworldly shapes and patterns that provide autonomous entities with their distinctly hyperspatial aesthetic. Alongside of this, various other subjective effects such as synesthesia, machinescapes, recursion, time distortion, and transpersonal states can all potentially synergize into an experience that is easy to misinterpret as something occurring outside of the human mind. In my personal opinion, if autonomous entities were truly something that exists beyond the human mind, I think there would likely be at least a single verifiable case of them conveying information to a person that they did not already know or could not have come to the conclusion of within that moment. This would also likely be testable to some degree, which has led myself and my close friends to casually experiment with asking DMT entities a variety of questions over the years. These questions have included math problems, metaphysical questions, philosophical questions, and queries pertaining to their general nature as beings inhabiting their particular world. However, each attempt at doing so has resulted in entities simply ignoring the question, arrogantly scoffing at the absurdity of us asking them such a trivial thing, or replying with vague, ambiguous wording that the person's own mind could have easily come up with. This has even been the case when the entities are presenting themselves as vastly more complex, knowledgeable, and powerful than the humans that they are interacting with. Now, just to clarify, while I do believe that autonomous entities are a result of a similar process to that of dream characters, I also don't want to be reductive and downplay the often overwhelmingly profound nature of this experience. For example, within the moment that entities are presenting themselves, I believe that to varying degrees they are genuinely conscious agents that the brain is simulating alongside our own. It does not seem unreasonable to me that if the brain can simulate one conscious agent during everyday sobriety, that in certain extenuating circumstances, such as mental illnesses, dream states, and hallucinogenic experiences, it could also temporarily allocate resources into simultaneously simulating other conscious agents. I also think it's sort of interesting to consider that many autonomous entities would pass the Turing test if interviewed, and I find this particularly fascinating in conjunction with the knowledge that entities also commonly present themselves as representative embodiments of various aspects of the subconscious mind, which suggests to me that at least to some extent, this experience may therefore allow people to directly interact with and communicate with various facets of their consciousness in a manner that would otherwise be entirely impossible without the use of hallucinogenic substances.